Hello and welcome to Smart Money. I'm Alishia Seckam, and joining me in conversation today is Sim Tshabalala, Chief Executive of Africa's biggest lender by assets, Standard Bank Group. Sim, always good to catch up. And right at the top, I want to take a step back first. Well, maybe a bit more than just a step back to long before you became CEO of Standard Bank Group. How would you describe your childhood? And growing up, just how interested were you in the world of finance?
My word. Thank you so much, Alicia, for that beautiful introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to chat to you and your audience. So my story is a classic South African story. I was born in December 1967 in the hospital in KwaShlabisa, which is in KZN. To cut a long story short, I then grew up in Soweto. So again, a classic African story. I went to Sacred Heart College for much of my high school, and matriculated at Sacred Heart. And there are a couple of interesting features in that upbringing which are relevant to where I am. So firstly, I had no real interest in finance, but my dad was a trader. He owned an organization called Chicken Upeu Wamachu, which was a fried chicken outlet, which he had designed himself. And so he was an enterprising man. My mom was a nurse and loves Charlotte Macleke. And as you know, Charlotte Macleke was one of the first people to have a degree in South Africa, African women to have a degree. And she got it from Wilberforce in the US. And I always wanted to be a lawyer. I loved going to Sacred Heart College. It's a Catholic school. And much of my own thinking about law and natural laws comes from going to a school like Sacred Heart. And let me make one last point. The headmaster was a gentleman called Brother Neil McGurk. I love Neil. And I learned a lot from Neil. One of the things I learned from him was the love for St. Thomas Aquinas, the Summa Contra Gentiles and Summa Theologica, which are the two great works that he wrote. And they are the definitive works on natural law.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I asked you the first question, right? Because tracking your tertiary education as well, Sim, I mean, you got a Bachelor of Arts degree at Rhodes University, followed by a Bachelor of Laws. You then did a Master of Laws at Notre Dame in the US. Long story short, why the shift? Why a career move from law to finance?
One of the things one learns in law is that you have to become expert very quickly in things that you were never taught. So a great litigator, for example, will become very expert at banking when they're litigating a banking issue, or they'll become an expert in insurance. And so you learn to learn in the profession of law. So that's the first thing to bear in mind. Secondly, however, I always wanted to be a human rights lawyer, but I actually didn't realize that it takes a particular temperament to be a good lawyer. So while I loved the law, I really didn't love the practice. Even after doing a master's at the University of Notre Dame, I just came back in 1993 and thought, I can't do this. Admitted as an attorney, but I can't do this. However, as I say, when you study law and you practice law, you learn to learn. And the things I learned in law, I've applied in the gentle art of banking. And we can chat about that a bit later as well.
Absolutely. And it's that agility that proved to work for you, right? If your rise at Standard Bank is anything to go by, so moving, from the head of structured finance back in 2000 to chief executive of Standard Bank South Africa in 2008, what would you attribute that success to? And I guess more directly, what do you think set you apart from your peers at that time?
Alicia, I joined Standard Bank the day Trevor Manuel made his announcement to decline the approach by Nedbank to acquire Standard Bank, if you recall, in those heady days of 2000. And I had been negotiating with David Munro, Ben Kruger, and Jacko to join the bank at the time, and I was being recruited by David Munro. But I held back my decision because I didn't want to join if there was going to be a takeover. So I was privileged to join a team that was being built post the the Netcore bid. What set me apart, firstly, what attracted me to Standard Bank was its long history, October 1862, its great heritage, its great DNA, its commitment to the African continent, the massive contribution it made to Africa. And in fact, if you've got time, if you could go and read Trevor Manuel's speech, the reasons Trevor Manuel gave for rebuffing the approach are the same reasons I joined Standard Bank. I was an outsider in the sense that here is a failed lawyer trying to become a banker. And my colleagues still wonder how I've managed that. In fact, also, I didn't play golf, and yet I've managed to find my way up the ranks of a great institution like Standard Bank. The point is, Standard Bank is a home for diverse people. The diversity in this institution is absolutely incredible and world-class, and contributes to its competitiveness. So I'm different. I'm an outsider. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an accountant. And indeed, I'm not part of the dismal science. I didn't do economics. The little economics I know is self-taught. But importantly, I think I had the set of skills, the set of values that were consistent with the organization, and the social capital that was necessary for the group at the time that the decision was made to appoint me in the various positions I was appointed. And it's been a case of being at the right place at the right time and then applying oneself.
So much so, Sim, that not long after that, in 2013, you were appointed joint CEO of Standard Bank Group, right? And then sole CEO in 2017. So talk us through that transition in particular for you.
Alishia, one of the most interesting and painful periods in my life was listening to people that didn't know much about banking and Standard Bank having strong views about how to run Standard Bank. So that was quite interesting. As the board made this decision, Ben and I made the decision, Jacko led us, and we implemented it, the co-CEO principle. So a bit of background. Firstly, Marcus Crassus, Pompey the Great, Julius Caesar ran Rome in a triumvirate in 60 BC. Ivan V and Peter the Great ran Russia in the 1600s. There have been many examples in banking. Goldman Sachs had joint CEOs, SAP had joint CEOs, and joint CEOs work where the individuals are professional, they've got a similar vision, they've got a similar set of values, they believe in the same things, and they're able to divide labor, be responsible for different things, but be jointly accountable, but committed to the same outcome. And that was the case with Ben and myself. And I'm very proud to say to you that when we took that role to where we took it together, the organization grew. And I'm also proud to be able to say, in partnership with my existing colleagues, Kenny, Funega, Arno, David Hodnett, Bill Blackie, Margaret Nienaber, we've all pulled together as a partnership, me being the first among equals, to produce a great outcome for this great institution.
With you underlining partnership, right, and let's call it collaborative effort, would you say it's more challenging to lead Standard Bank or to work under a group chief executive?
I would say it's different. I wouldn't say it's any more or less challenging. So when I think about my stresses, I'm not any more stressed than Funega, who runs PPB, or Kenny, who runs CIB. They've got different stresses. They're more operational than I am. I have a slightly different role to them. But you know what, Alishia, what is really fantastic is that we are partners like surgeons, a partnership of surgeons with different specializations, aiming for the same outcome, and that outcome results in, balance sheet of $166 billion, return on equity of 18.8%, client satisfaction improving, a bigger franchise, and a big contribution to the growth of the African continent.
Yeah. So let's use the opportunity now then to home in on some of what you're having to help the group navigate its way through, right? Pay-shap's been a big talking point in the local financial services sector of late, digitalizing cash. That's what we're looking at it as. how much of a game changer are we looking at, Sim? Because it changes the way people interact and transact with their money, and perhaps triggers some kind of shift on your end as well in terms of operational approach.
Alishia, if one looks at the argument from parallel case, you look at examples in China, Alipay and WeChat Pay, Brazil, India, Thailand, and other parts of the world, there's no question but that instant payments have been good for society. They reduce the cost of product and service delivery. They make it safer for people to transact. People transact and have access to payments for 24 hours a day. It's consistent, of course, also with the central bank's vision, Vision 2025, about inclusivity, reducing cost, and decashing society. Why is that important? Cash is extremely expensive, and frankly, in the modern environment, is dangerous and inefficient. And therefore, this proposition that the authorities have put in place is actually good. It has also increased competitiveness. You've got new entrants, making it more convenient for customers and forcing us as financial institutions to become more competitive and more innovative. And so all around, good for customers, good for society, good for banks, and good for our competitiveness.
Look, it's a feature of the digital era, right? And as much as it brings opportunity, it elevates your risk as well. You're familiar with it. So I've got to ask Sim, how do you balance the need to innovate with the risks associated with new technology implementation? And what strategies are you employing to mitigate those risks and stay on top of things?
So, Alishia, even as you and I are speaking now, you're aware that there's a massive global problem. Microsoft globally is down. And so that raises operational risk. And I can tell you that proudly at Standard Bank, we are continuing to function as if nothing's happened because we're resilient. So the point is that we've been able to innovate. And in fact, Microsoft is one of our partners, as is AWS, and they are a partner in the space of improving customer experience, making sure that you have got more personalized solutions for our clients. And thirdly, our other partner is Salesforce, which we use as our customer engagement platform. And so digitization is forcing banks to become more and more competitive, to become more and more sophisticated. And in that sense, you've got both demand. So our clients demand products and services that are as efficient, as sophisticated as they would get from their other lives through Google, through Uber, and so forth. And banks have had to respond. We've also had to respond to new entrants, PayPal, the new entrants like Capitec, Discovery, Time. But we think that we have got the agility and also the capital base and the experience to be able to respond. And lastly, just an important point for you and your listeners to know is we spend a vast amount of money on risk management. And we're able to respond to, firstly, the competitive environment and also the competitive environment that arises from what the bandits do and having to respond appropriately to them.
Like you say, Sim, it's a highly competitive environment out there, and you've got to be alive to the opportunities for Standard Bank to effectively leverage off them, right? Now, I know I'm jumping to a different sphere here, but it's also taking approach to banking into new terrain, and that is green financing. As you ramp things up on this front, what are you noting and paying attention to? Because this is a long-term sustainability issue.
Alishia, there is no question philosophically, our policy, which we announced in 2022, is consistent with the science. We accept that CO2 emissions have grown from 280 parts per million since just before the Industrial Revolution to 420 parts per million in 2022, and at the moment. Temperatures have risen by 1.1%. And therefore, you've got the Paris Agreement, which commits you to trying to get them to below 1.5%. And nations that we are part of have got nationally determined commitments that try and get us to net zero by 2050. Our policy is consistent with all of those. It's also consistent with nationally determined commitments, and it's also consistent with the science, as I say, as determined by the IPCC. We committed to reducing those emissions, and we've got products and solutions that help us to reduce those emissions. The most important one of which is our commitment to do green finance of roughly 250 billion rand between 2022 and 2026. As at the last reporting period, we're at roughly 105 billion. A large proportion of that is financing for large distributed power solutions, and a large proportion of that is also for individuals. So if you bank with Standard Bank, as I know that you do, you know that we've got solutions that help you to acquire solar, cheapen the cost of electricity for your house, and therefore make your house green. In other words, we've got solutions for individuals, and then we've also got solutions for our major corporates that are trying to put in place products and services. My favorite example, of course, is the transaction we've done for Seriti. And so, yes, it's a growing part of the business. In fact, it's amongst the fastest growing parts of corporate and investment banking. And it's going to be an increasing proportion of our balance sheet as time goes forward.
Absolutely. Well, we've just touched on two trends, right? Mobile payments and then green energy that are taking hold of the market that you've got to be alive to. What other big trends are you expecting to dominate the finance sector, Sim, over the next few years?
Alishia, we've just had the GNU and we've just had the speech by the president, Operation Vulindlela. And then, of course, in addition to electricity, you've got logistics, you've got water, you've got telcos, and then at a high level, because we operate in 21 countries on the continent, you've got the $3.4 trillion that needs to be invested in Africa in infrastructure, ports, roads, cities, and we stand ready to facilitate those transactions, provide the capital, provide the advice, and provide the thought leadership. And those are massive vectors of growth on the African continent. From a consumer perspective, a population that is getting younger, healthier, and wealthier, and therefore there'll be financial deepening, and therefore banks and insurance companies and asset managers who are well positioned for that demographic dividend will make a lot of money, and we stand ready to take advantage of that.
As you work some to keep up with those, as a business operating in South Africa, you're having to keep up with politics as well. That with business and politics having become inextricably intertwined. You alluded to the GNU. How are you feeling about the new government of national unity and President Cyril Ramaphosa's new cabinet?
Alishia, we've consistently said as Standard Bank, and I must preface my answer by making this point, that there's a social division of labor. Our jobs as corporates is not to get entangled in the politics that are associated with political parties, but it's our job to argue vociferously for policies that contribute to prosperity. And therefore, what are the features of the GNU and what the president said last night which give us hope about this prosperity? GDP growth of 3.5% in the medium term is now more probable because there's a recommitment to the constitution, a commitment to the rule of law, a commitment to property rights, a commitment to inclusive growth, a commitment to the generation of long-term job creation, and a commitment to making business easier. And importantly, a commitment to knitting South Africa more tightly into Africa, and therefore taking advantage of the AfCFTA. Just think about it, Alishia, as I close this point. 1.3 billion people, $3 trillion, money, goods, people, and ideas flowing in Africa, and we as a financial institution being in a position to facilitate all of that. It is incredibly exciting to be headquartered in South Africa and participating in that growth.
As exciting as that is, Sim, before I let you go, when you aren't keeping an eye on the politics and guiding and growing Africa's biggest bank amidst it all, what do you do to relax?
Oh, Alishia, I cook. I love cooking. And it's one of the credits to my wife. A few years ago, she said to me, Chief, you need a hobby. So cooking, I love cooking. And my favorite is curried oxtail. So if you're really kind to me, one day you may be invited to come and partake of curried oxtail. The
I
second thing
look
I love
forward to
doing,
it.
that love doing is glass of wine, watching rugby. And then thirdly, I love reading. I'm currently reading a book called The Rational Optimist. It should be compulsory reading. And travel. That's the last one. I just love leisure travel, not business travel.
Let's leave it there. Always a pleasure. Thanks so much for making time to chat to us today. Sim Tshabalala is Chief Executive of Standard Bank Group.